Welcome to another virtual program, Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park. In this program, you will see an interview with author and historian Robert Jenkins, given by Ranger Jake Bowling. The two men are sitting in their respective offices on a recorded Zoom session.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to another virtual program with Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park with our special guest, Mr. Robert Jenkins. As most of you know, have been watching some of our programs this month. We are doing specific programs on the Atlanta campaign. We are really using this virtual platform to our advantage in trying to get creative with how we interpret the major stops along the Atlanta campaign to not just jump in June with the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. And to do that, we reached out. So we try to be humble at the park and know that we do not know it all, even though the park is kind of tasked with maintaining the Atlanta campaign. We reach out to people that have studied it a lot more and that do a great job. And that's what brings us with our special guest, Mr. Robert Jenkins, today. So Robert, or Bob, if I can call you Bob, would you mind just introducing yourself and telling us a little about yourself?
Sure. My name is Bob Jenkins. I actually grew up in Chamblee, Northeast Atlanta, and attended the old Sequoia High School in Doraville. That's where the boys from Doraville, the Atlanta Rhythm Section, hail from. And went to Georgia Southern undergrad in the 1980s, and after college at Southern and then Mercer Law School in Macon, settled in Dalton in 1990 and have been practicing law in Northwest Georgia for the past 30 years. And I've always followed my passion since I was in the fourth grade, following reading anything I could get my hands on about the Civil War, especially the Civil War in Georgia. And so that's sort of expanded a little bit over the years as I've researched and tried to go to various parts of the country and especially in Georgia, looking at different sites and trying to interpret battlefields.
Awesome. No, that's great. And Bob has also written a couple of books that we carry here and has gone on a couple of lectures here. And as he's mentioned, he's these battlefield tours and helping us interpret these battles. And that's why we reached out to him for, this next. So the focus on this video is going to be on the Battle of Resaca. So one of the last programs we did on the Atlanta campaign was kind of the opening action of Rocky Face Ridge. And so, Bob, take us to Resaca and maybe help us put it in the bigger picture of the Atlanta campaign, if you don't mind.
Sure, happy to, Jake. First of all, you can't tell the story of Dalton without also telling the story of Resaca. Resaca and Dalton go together, much like Richmond and Petersburg go together in the 1864 Overland Campaign. They're like peanut butter and jelly. Resaca is the Achilles heel, if you may, of Dalton. In other words, the back door to Dalton, further south, 13 miles south on the Western and Atlantic Railroad, lies the little village of Resaca, which is located at an important railroad bridge over the Oostenaula River, which is just north of Calhoun. That is General Johnston's line of supply and his line of communication, the telegraph line that ran up and down the railroad line, and they of course sent emails each day back and forth to they had electronic mail in the 1860s, don't you?
Yeah.
They through a telegraph, of course. But so Johnston was in communication with the rest of the country and with his president Jefferson Davis in Richmond via the Western and Atlantic Railroad and the telegraph line. And he would need 4 trains a day to supply his army in Dalton. Later, he would need 6 trains a day as he moved further south and was reinforced by Polk's Army of Mississippi coming out of eastern Mississippi and western Alabama. So as far as Resaca, the town originally gets her name from a Mexican War location and battle named Resaca de la Palma. And a number of railroad workers back in the 1840s, when the Western and Atlantic Railroad was being built in the late 1840s, had been veterans of the Mexican War a couple of years prior. So some of those railroad workers gave her the name Resaca de la Palma, and it later was shortened to Resaca.
I never knew that.
Yeah, so I think you touched on in part one the importance of a gap known as Snake Creek Gap, and Snake Creek Gap is a passage that runs the length of the backside of the ridge that blocks basically it's a north-south or runs more or less northeast to southwest, blocking Dalton, known as Rocky Face Ridge. There's only 2 or 3 ways over that ridge. One is at Mill Creek Gap, also known as Buzzard's Roost Gap in Dalton, which is today's exit 336 at the Rocky Face exit in Dalton. The second one is a more direct line, but it's a man-made called Dug Gap, and it's just a little road, that Dug Gap Mountain Road, that was dug over more or less west of Dalton, straight over the mountain down to Villanelle and on over through Ship's Gap over Taylor's Ridge to get to Lafayette. So that was dug to allow a faster passage for wagon routes in the 1850s and 60s, and so that people would not have to travel all the way around the north face of Rocky Face Ridge up to today's Rocky Face and through that Mill Creek Gap. They could go more directly.
Sure.
And then the next gap is all the way 11 to 13 miles south at Snake Creek Gap, where it deposits down in Gordon County at the bottom of it to a place known as Sugar Valley, which is just an the opening there. And then about 5 miles from Sugar Valley to its east is Resaca. So if one wanted to bypass Dalton, and what Sherman had in mind was he sent McPherson's Army of the Tennessee, 2 corps, the 15th and 16th Corps, Blackjack Logan's 15th Corps with 3 divisions, and then Grenville Dodge and the 16th Corps with 2 divisions, 23,000 infantry more or less, and 249 cavalry, by the way. That's all the eyes that he had was the 92nd Mounted Illinois Infantry under Lieutenant Colonel Phillips. Well, that was the only cavalry that he would have with him, but they would come down the back of Taylor's Ridge, get to Lafayette, come over Ship's Gap, and then Villanelle, and then about 1.5 miles, 2 miles east of Villanelle is the northern end of Snake Creek Gap, and then there's a 6-mile run down the pass of Snake Creek Gap, and it's almost like a tunnel because there's a range of ridges on both sides, and Horn Mountain on one side and Johns Mountain on the other, and you run down the length of that and you deposit at the bottom to open up to Sugar Valley, and that gives you a chance from Sugar Valley to make a dash 5 miles east to get to Resaca. So that was Sherman's game plan, was to send McPherson through there, make a raid on Resaca, cut the railroad, as well as cut the telegraph line. Meanwhile, he would use General Thomas and his large Army of the Cumberland, about 60 to 66,000 men in 3 corps. The 4th Corps under Oliver Otis Howard, coming down from Red Clay into to Dalton by the north. The 14th Corps under General John Palmer coming down from Ringgold to Tunnel Hill, and pressuring Dalton from that northwest, and then the 20th Corps under General Hooker, the famous Fighting Joe Hooker from the Eastern Theater, most of the Eastern troops, but some Western troops mixed in with this newly developed 20 Corps, and the 20 Corps was the old 11th Corps and 12th Corps and some Midwestern troops combined to form a 20 Corps under Joseph Hooker. They came over Nickajack Gap from Lee and Gordon's Mills in the old Chickamauga battlefield, and they would come at Dalton through Dalton Valley from the northwest. Finally, you have Schofield's Army of the Ohio coming out of Cleveland and coming to Dalton from the northeast slightly. So those fellas were, and that's about 13,500. So about 75,000 Federals to 80,000 Federals are going to be converging on Dalton under the Army of the Cumberland and the small 1 Corps Army of the Ohio, while McPherson makes the end run through Snake Creek Gap. And Johnston is defending with 7 divisions in Dalton, 2 corps, Hardee's Corps with 4 divisions. Let's see, Bate, which is a little bit undersized, they're about 3,700 men. Walker, Georgians mostly, about 5,000 to 6,000. Cheatham, also 5,000 to 6,000, all Tennesseans. and Claiborne, who a lot of people believe had some of the best men, some of the hotshot fighting units. And there were a lot of different units that we could talk about, but Claiborne's men made the 4th Division of Pardee. Then Hood, who had come down from Richmond, commanded the other corps of 3 divisions, which was Stevenson, Carter Stevenson's division, Stewart, AP Alexander Peter Stewart from Tennessee, and then a 3rd division under General Hindman. So 7 divisions, roughly 40 to 45,000 Confederates, more or less, toting guns. There may have been more if you add the fellows that were Teamsters and other people in the rear area, but essentially 40 to 45,000, 43 something in the trenches, basically in Dalton.
It's a lot of moving
another
parts.
15,000. Yeah, another 15,000 is coming from General Polk's Army of Mississippi. They have been at Demopolis and at Tuscaloosa and at Selma, Alabama, following a failed, following Meridian expedition is what was known in February, when Sherman made a raid to try to get to Mobile. But they're over there, and as late as May 4th, Johnston is he's sending emails to Richmond asking President Davis to send him help. And he sends, finally, May 4th, he allows General Polk to start sending reinforcements to Johnston. Polk decides, I'm going to come and bring everybody. So he comes and starts to bring essentially 2.5 divisions worth, 12 to 15,000 men. They're not going to get to Dalton in time to make a difference, to help Johnston at Dalton, but they are going to start arriving the 10th, the 11th, and the 12th of May at Resaca to make a difference there. So Johnston and Dalton will be fighting 40 to 80, more or less. But in Resaca, he's going to be fighting 55, 60,000 strong against perhaps 100,000, 106,000 Federals. And one other thing about Resaca, I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. It's the only battle in the Atlanta campaign where all of the forces of both armies, Sherman having 3 armies in an army group, and Johnston having essentially 2 armies, Army of Tennessee, Army of Mississippi, that 3rd Corps later under Polk, at the time it's called Army of Mississippi. But that's at Resaca is the only time where you see actually units from all 5 of those armies, both army groups fighting one another and within a line of sight or within a same zone of each other. For example, at Kennesaw or Atlanta or Peachtree Creek or Ezra Church or Jonesboro, all these other places, Pickett's Mill, New Hope, the Hell Hole it's called, New Hope, Pickett's Mill, and Dallas, and that sort of three-way, 3 battles in one, so to speak, over a week. Every one of those, there are portions of a Federal unit attacking, a couple of divisions here, maybe a corps there. And there are portions of a Confederate side defending or attacking, again, maybe a couple of divisions or a corps. But at Resaca, it's the only place that we find in the Atlanta campaign that all of both army groups are in combat or in the zone of combat, fighting in an active zone together. Arguably, they do that in Atlanta during the siege, but again, in a particular battle, Resaca is the only one that we see that. It's also the largest concentration of men in Georgia. It was bigger in terms of the number of participants than even Chickamauga, although Chickamauga was certainly a heavier casualty list. Both sides of Chickamauga had roughly 60,000. But here you've got 60,000 Confederates, 110, 106 something thousand Federals. So it was the largest, actually larger than Gettysburg. If you think about Resaca is essentially a 2 or 3 day battle, May the 13th, 14th, and 15th, and that's not even including the May 9, 10, 11 stuff, which we can get into the sort of the precursor to Resaca. But 3 days in combat in Resaca, May 13, 14, and 15, equate that with Gettysburg, July 1, July 2, July 3. There were more people, more soldiers in and around Resaca, and the Resaca battlefield's actually geographically larger than Gettysburg. Now, the casualties are much different, not in the 20s for each side, 20,000. But that helps you put Resaca maybe a little bit mentally in terms of its significance and size and scope.
Well, that's a really good point. And we talk. One of the things we have to be careful of when we talk about the battle that happened here at Kennesaw Mountain is that, the size of the armies. We have to mention the sizes, like those numbers you just mentioned: 60,000 on the Confederate side, 100,000 on the Union side. We have to mention those were their numbers originally at the beginning of the campaign, and they were substantially less at this battle here. So it's a really good point to mention that they were in full force, and like you mentioned, kind of on one big area within line of sight of each other.
Right. So the game plan at Resaca, let me back up and tell you this because it's a real trigger point. There's sort of two perspectives on Resaca. The first one from the federal standpoint is the common feeling or belief is that McPherson, and by the way, his family pronounces his name James Birdseye McPherson, not James Birdseye McPherson that we might do, but the family would say, to say that there is no fear in McPherson. So that's what, according to Dr. Richard McMurray, who has interviewed some of the descendants. Well, McPherson on May the 8th gets through Snake Creek Gap with his force. And while he's doing that, Sherman is using the rest of the federal forces again to occupy Johnston's attention in and around Dalton. He even launches an attack, which is going to be a division under John White Star or White Gary, G-E-A-R-Y, John Gary, a Philadelphian, and he is commanding a second division of the 20th Corps. They're attacking Dug Gap Mountain on the evening about 4 o'clock of May the 8th. And that's a Sunday, May 8, 1864. They're attacking Dug Gap Mountain, and Johnston is surprised by that, actually. Shouldn't have been, but he was. And fortunately for him, there were a few troops up there. There was a brigade of cavalry, Grigsby's Kentucky Cavalry, about 1,000 strong, about 800 defending and about 200 holding horses on the eastern side. And then there were about 250 Arkansas troops under the 1st and 2nd Arkansas dismounted infantry. Some fellows that actually were from the Army of Mississippi that had been brought up and just happened to be placed on duty at Dug Gap. So if it was not for them, Geary could have taken Dug Gap Mountain on the evening of May the 8th. But about 1,000 Confederates defended while Gary's division, or parts of his division, about a brigade and a half, attacked it. So about 3,500 Federals attacked about 1,000 Confederates the afternoon of May 8th at the Battle of Dug Gap. I tell you that because while that's going on, it's buying time for McPherson to slip around the back door and get into Snake Creek Gap. And so by the evening of May the 8th, his men are well into the gap and ready to proceed the next morning to make their raid to Resaca. Problem that, so the next day, McPherson gets up on the morning of May the 9th at daylight, expecting to go out of Snake Creek Gap and go over from Sugar Valley and over and cut the railroad at Resaca, cut the telegraph line, and then fall back. That was his orders. His orders from Sherman were, I want you to make a passage through Snake Creek, and then I want you to make a dash over, cut the railroad at Resaca. It doesn't say anything about destroying the Eastern Iowa Railroad Bridge. Might have helped if you did, and cut the telegraph line, and then fall back and hold the line there forming a line of defense at the mouth of the southern end of Snake Creek Gap and await further developments. Surely Johnston will have to fall back from Dalton, and when he does, you can hit him in flank, or we can hit him. The rest of the Federals can chase him from Dalton and hit him while he's trying to make a desperate crossing of the river with, and get back to his line of supply. That was his orders. So on the morning of the 9th of May, McPherson gets up, his guys start heading out, and immediately they're surprised. There are some Confederate cavalry. It's the same cavalry, the Grigsby's Kentuckians who had been at Dug Gap the evening before. When they're done with that evening and they're having finally eating at 10 or 11 o'clock, they get orders from Johnston because he's gotten word that maybe something's going on down in Villanelle or Snake Creek Gap finally. That's a different story, but so he sends Grigsby's cavalry down there. They're not happy. They get on their horses and have to spend the night riding all the way down there so that the next morning they're ready to greet McPherson.
Mhm.
They fall back throughout the morning and midday as McPherson has to deploy some units and skirmish lines and get a couple of brigades online to push them back. And he's slowly pushing the 5 miles from the bottom of Snake Creek Gap at Sugar Valley across maybe 6 miles, 5 or 6 miles from there over to Resaca. About 12 or 1 o'clock that day, McPherson sends a very important message to Sherman. They get to a place called Calhoun Crossroads, or today's Hall Memorial Road, I believe, and they get to there, and they're about 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles from Resaca, and it's around 12:30. McPherson sends a note to Sherman. He says, "We have made it through the gap. This morning we have been pushing back some rebel cavalry skirmishers in front of us, but only feeble resistance. By now, Dodge's 16th Corps, 2 divisions, are within 1.5 or 2 miles of Resaca." Well, by the time Sherman gets the dispatch, the horse rider has to ride all the way back 5 miles to Sugar Valley, 6 miles up Snake Creek Gap, 2 miles to up Villanelle, up Mill Creek, through Dogwood Valley, up to Tunnel Hill, to the Clisby Austin house in Tunnel Hill where Sherman's at, or at the what's called today Blue Signal Hill that Sherman has his command post during the day that's just south of there at the mouth of Mill Creek. Anyway, by the time the federal courier makes that run, it's probably 4:35, 5:30 o'clock, that afternoon. And Sherman gets that message. He's at the Clisby Austin house when he gets it, and he slams his fist down on the table and says, "I've got Joe Johnston dead." Because Sherman reasons that this message was sent at 12:30. Now it's 4:30, 5:30. It's been 4 or 5 hours. Surely the thing is done. By now, the 2 divisions have gone over and cut the railroad and messed up Johnston. And Sherman's thinking, he's the cat what ate the canary. I mean, he feels pretty good about his situation at that point. So convinced that by that evening, throughout the evening, he's sending his own emails up to Washington, to General Halleck, and then on to Lincoln and down to Grant, who's in the field in Virginia against Lee. Well, all of those messages he's sending, basically by the evening and by the next morning, he's convinced himself that McPherson has, taken Resaca and destroyed it. And Johnston's in real deep trouble. However, let's get back to the ranch. McPherson, who was at the crossroads at 12:30 and deployed his 2 divisions to attack Resaca, finds some Confederates in front of him to his surprise. It's actually some Georgia Military Institute cadets, some of them wearing red uniforms from Marietta. And then there are a couple of veteran units, the 37th Mississippi and the 17th Alabama, that are there. All told, there's about 4,000 Confederates in and around Resaca. But McPherson's gotten to within a mile or so of Resaca on this hill that we know today as the Bald Hill, and Confederates are firing at him. Some of these infantry have been deployed out front, fired a couple of rounds, and these boys and kids have run back after doing that to the relative safety of the trenches, the inner works. And some long-range guns have been firing, and that tells McPherson that there's more than meets the eye here at Resaca. There's some guns hitting me at a mile range. That's not 12-pound Napoleons. That must be, something bigger. And there are some 20-pound guns at Fort Wayne. Well, McPherson gets cold feet. He has 2 divisions ready to go, Veach and I believe Sweeney divisions, 2 divisions under the 16th Corps ready to attack. But he calls off the game. By the time they've deployed, it's 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and there's about 30 men from that 92nd Mounted Infantry, the 249 cavalrymen. That's the only eyes that McPherson has. Those guys, about 30 of them, make a raid a little bit north of Resaca to a place called Tilton, about 5 miles up the railroad, and they cut the telegraph line and run back. No damage to the railroad, only the telegraph line. They come running back. Some ladies some Southern women see it, and they go up there and they're trying to put it, you know, fix it back together, and so that's the only damage, that the rail line's been cut temporarily, or excuse me, the telegraph line temporarily. That's the only damage at Resaca or Tilton. Well, McPherson then falls back to the mouth of the gap that evening at Sugar Valley, sends back another dispatch, which Sherman does not receive until daylight the next morning. When he wakes up at 7 o'clock at the Flisby Austin house, he receives this message saying, you know, we did all that I told you, and then when we got to Resaca, we found that there were Confederate and prepared works there and guns, and so not knowing the strength of the enemy in front of us and being in a foreign, you know, in enemy territory, we fell back and did the prudent thing and fell back. Well, that made Sherman feel like 2 days later, when he sees McPherson on the evening of the 11th, first thing he says to him is, he says, "Well, Mac," and they're friends, they were comrades, and he liked McPherson very, very much. He said, "Well, Mac, you've missed the opportunity of a lifetime."
Man.
And I would, they went into a tent and closed the flap, and we don't know what else was said, but we do know from Sherman's memoir that he didn't chastise McPherson too badly, because what he wrote was, he said, "But I suppose it was the prudent thing to do given Mac's circumstances." Now, having said all that, let's talk about what should have happened and what didn't happen.
Sure.
McPherson should have turned it on Sherman and said, "No, General Sherman, you, sir, missed the opportunity of a lifetime because you didn't give me enough men to do the job, and you put me blind without any cavalry."
Right.
This idea was actually cooked up by General Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga. George Thomas, a Virginian, had come down to Dalton in February and done a demonstration, found out that Dalton was too strong to be carried in force, but he also found out, the second thing he found out was that there were gaps, Dug Gap, and then further down the Snake Creek Gap, that perhaps might be left unguarded. And so he had espoused the idea and had proposed it to General Grant, who was still in Chattanooga in March of '64. And Grant kind of dismissed it. Grant didn't jihad with Thomas. That's another topic for another day. But then when Sherman came back from his Meridian expedition in Mississippi, came back to take command of all the forces here while Grant went east, in April, Thomas gave this proposal to Sherman and said, "Let me take my entire Army of the Cumberland down through Snake Creek Gap. And I'm not talking about a raid. I want to come in with 60,000 and block the thing. We'll dig in and destroy the railroad if we need to, but we'll checkmate him and block it.
Right.
You take the other two small armies, 20-something thousand of the Tennessee and the 15 or 13,000 of the Ohio, and you can play Nana Boo Boo in front of Dalton and occupy Johnston's attention while we block the back door, and that'll checkmate him." And so I liken that to Thomas was playing chess, but Sherman was playing checkers. And what I mean by that is Sherman originally, his strategy was, he said no to Thomas on that idea because, and this part was valid, some of Thomas's forces, the 14th Corps at Ringgold and the 4th Corps up at Red Clay and Cohutta, Georgia, they were within visual sight of Wheeler's cavalry. I mean, they had been skirmishing throughout the winter, and there was a no man's land there about 6 or 8 miles between Barnell and Cohutta on the north side and Prater's Mill, and on the northwest side, Tunnel Hill to Ringgold was kind of the no man's land, and Nicky Jack Gap. So that was sort of no man's land. Those two corps were within sight, and if Thomas had tried to extract them and move them around the back door into Resaca, Snake Creek Gap, they would have been spotted, and Johnston would have known the gig was up and it's time to evacuate and get down below that line and defend Rome to Calhoun below the Usinawa River. So that was a valid point. But he wanted originally, Sherman wanted to send McPherson from North Alabama on a raid down into Rome and cross the Usinawa River at Rome, and then make a dash down to Kingston and cut the railroad, the Western Atlantic Railroad line there, south of Calhoun, south of Adairsville and Cassville. So that's what Sherman wanted to do. In fact, that's what Johnston thought Sherman was going to do. So Johnston was trying to figure out, how do I defend Dalton and worry about Rome? But perhaps he failed to think about what might happen at Snake Creek Gap or Resaca. And that's the second big issue about this whole campaign: Dalton and Resaca, peanut butter and jelly, Snake Creek Gap. How do you interpret or understand the two? You have to put yourself in the minds of these two commanders. On the federal side, Sherman really wanted to make a dash for Rome, but he finds out late in April that McPherson's not going to have his 17th Corps, the 3rd Corps of the Army of the Tennessee under Francis Blair. Those fellows are up north in Ohio and Illinois and Indiana and so forth, most of them on furloughs. They've been in active campaigning, and so they're on a furlough. They're not going to be available to the Atlanta campaign, or the Georgia campaign, as I call it, until June 17th. So the first month of the war, a third of the Army of the Tennessee is not even in play. And effectively, those guys are going to kind of replace what Sherman's losses are in the first month of the war. So when Sherman loses, 10 or 15,000 in combat, he's going to gain 10 or 15,000 in that corps coming in. So
that's an interesting concept.
That's going to keep his but he also realizes that McPherson's cavalry are in places like North Mississippi, West Tennessee, dealing with Forrest, and in places like North Alabama, dealing with General Roddy and Confederate cavalry in those two places. So he's not going to have eyes, and so Sherman gets a little bit of cold feet about the Rome idea, because he feels like McPherson might get ambushed out there by himself, too far away from the rest of the Federals. So he decides to modify the plan, and he adopts Thomas's idea and says, I want you to come in, McPherson, not through Alabama, but come around into Chattanooga, around the north horn of Lookout Mountain, come down through the old Chickamauga battlefield, down toward Lafayette, behind Taylor's Ridge, and then slip in through Snake Creek Gap and go make that. But here's the real critical difference that a lot of historians miss, or I think a lot of us miss. Thomas, the chess player, said, we take 60,000 and block at Resaca.
Sure.
Okay, that'll force Johnston's hand. He'll either have to fight his way out of the trap at Dalton. That means fighting his 40 against my 60 to try to break through to get back over the southern side down toward Calhoun and toward Atlanta to be able to get his supplies and stay. Or Johnston will have to boogie to the east towards Spring Place, and there are no railroads east of Dalton. So he would effectively put himself on country wagon roads with his back to the North Georgia Mountains, the Northeast and North Georgia Mountains. So it would have left Johnston checkmated. He would have either had to fight to the death to get through it, or, it could have been a Vicksburg deal here, or run to the east and try to slip around southeast and get around the thing. But he would be in a real mess. Sherman, the checker player, had McPherson, take your 23,000 men and slip through the gap, make a raid, don't block, but make a raid and cut the thing at Resaca, and then fall back to the mouth of Snake Creek Gap at Sugar Valley and wait for developments. So I would venture to say that Sherman missed the opportunity of a lifetime, not McPherson.
Well, that's a good point.
Is that Johnston, so we talked about the federal perspective. From the Confederate perspective, why was Snake Creek Gap left unguarded? That's the real big mystery for the Southern perspective. There's an article that's an unpublished article by Wilbur G. Kurtz that's found. You can find it at the Atlanta papers at the Atlanta History Center in the Keenan Research Room. But he tried to answer that question 50 years ago, and others have, and everybody has come up sort of empty because the record is fairly silent. There's a great quote by Patrick Claiborne in his reports during the Atlanta campaign. There's an August '64 report where he asked General Francis Mackle, who was chief of staff of Johnston, why was the gap left unguarded? And Mackle says it was because of a failure to obey orders by an officer who he wouldn't say. Well, the implication was it was Wheeler. Wheeler had failed to keep eyes and ears to the west through Dogwood Valley and Jack Gap and Taylor's Ridge and so forth, because Wheeler was busy on the north side of Tunnel Hill and and Barnell on the north of Dalton, northwest of Dalton, and not looking to his west-southwest. Yes, that's a part of the story. But the other part of the story is Johnston had so discounted the defensive abilities here that he was ready to run anyway, thinking that Sherman was going to take Rome, and when that happened, he'd have to fall back. So Johnston had completely ignored Snake Creek Gap. Even if Wheeler was observing, Johnston wasn't apparently prepared to do anything about it, like put some men there to actually defend it. A couple of brigades or division, or somebody there. So even if Wheeler had been watching to his west, it wouldn't have really changed anything, because Johnston doesn't seem to have demonstrated any effective use of how to defend or counterattack, to use these ridges and valleys to any good effect. The area of northwest Georgia is known as the land of ridge and valley, because we have a lot of ridges and valleys that looks kind of like a washboard, an old washboard. And these ridges block, and they all run generally northeast to southwest. So they shield Dalton, but then there's gaps around, and as we've talked about today, the Snake Creek Gap, that's the Achilles heel to Resaca for Dalton. So anyway, that's a little bit about the various perspectives of from both sides. I would say that Johnston was playing checkers, not chess here, and Sherman was playing checkers, not chess here. Johnston got lucky. He got lucky at by not losing Dug Gap, because by happenstance there were enough Confederates there to repel it, and despite 3-to-1, 4-to-1 odds. And then he got lucky at Resaca that McPherson didn't have enough to come with him on the 9th of May, and that 4,000 Confederates were able to scare him enough to have him run back to the mouth without damaging or taking Resaca. To McPherson's credit, when you don't have eyes and you're in open country, you've got to drop off some of your forces to defend. So for example, when he entered Snake Creek Gap, he dropped off 2 brigades on the back door at the northwest part of Snake Creek Gap at Villanow to guard his wagon train. Okay, there's 23 down to 18 maybe. Well, then when he gets to the bottom, there's a road to the south, doesn't know what it is, it actually leads toward Rome. He then has to drop off some more men, another couple of brigades. And then he starts heading east. There's a road toward the north. It's a road toward Dalton. He has to drop off more men. And then he gets to this crossroads, another crossroads for running south to Calhoun, running north to Dalton. He has to drop off more men. So by now, basically all of the 15th Corps under Logan has been deployed defending all these different directions, because he has no eyes, no cavalry to run up and down to check on them for him.
Right.
For all he knows, I mean, he's stretched out like a snake. For all he knows, Johnston could come down one of those roads and crush him in detail and break him up. So he's only attacking with perhaps 8,000 Federals, 2 divisions. He's only able to attack this village of Resaca with a portion of his 23,000. So it's not like he came with 23 and chickened out to attack 4. He came with 23, and by the time he spread out 15 of them to deal with all these things, he's only got about 8 to use to actually make the strike. And what's left in front of him, he has no idea. So, so I don't think McPherson should be faulted. Plus, all this winter, he's been over in Vicksburg, Memphis, Huntsville, Decatur. He's been in other parts of Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee. And while Thomas has been in Chattanooga all this time, and Sherman's been back and forth, McPherson is late to the game. So you're asking him to make a raid with limited men, no horse, no cavalry, and be essentially blind to the theater. And it's all new to him. So I think Sherman missed the opportunity. Johnston got lucky at Dug Gap, got lucky again that McPherson didn't do the dashing thing. And then he got lucky a 3rd time at Resaca. 2 times he got lucky at Resaca, because when Sherman figures out what's going on, Sherman asked Thomas again for some advice, and General Thomas says, well, we didn't bag him at Resaca, but you know what? You can just send some forces over at Lay's Ferry and cut the thing again at Calhoun, just south of the river, and then Johnston will be stuck. Same thing, really. And Sherman doesn't fully take it. He pushes Johnston, and Johnston falls back to Resaca to set up a perimeter when he finds out that Sherman is going to come through Snake Creek Gap, and that's going to set up the fighting of Resaca. On the movements are going to happen on the 11th and 12th and 13th, and by the 14th and 15th, there's going to be a 2-day battle at Resaca. But but Johnston's going to bug out again when he sees that Federals have crossed. They have to do it twice. Sweety's division crosses at Lay's Ferry, and Johnston's going to bug out the evening of May the 15th, and again try to protect his line of supply. So Johnston got lucky at Dalton and Resaca, and twice really with Resaca. Sherman could have checkmated him at Resaca if he was playing chess.
Yeah, sure, but he's stuck on the game of checkers, which has a lot less maneuverability, which is a pretty good metaphor. You know, go ahead.
Now, to our friends that are listening, to our friends that are listening and watching, and I'm an equal opportunity employer. I'll praise and bash each general as best I can. To Sherman's credit, he is the perfect example of the reverse Peter principle. Sherman was not an effective tactician. That is, on the field of battle, he got embarrassed the first day at Shiloh, at Snyder's Bluff, at Vicksburg. Chickasaw had a couple of bad days at Vicksburg. Had a bad day at Missionary Ridge on the tunnel side against Claiborne's fellows. Didn't really understand tactically how to checkmate at Resaca and again at Lay's Ferry. But to his credit, where his strength lies is he understood how to supply his army. The preparation that Sherman made to get his line of supply competent from Nashville all the way down to Chattanooga and beyond to keep his army in the field, he's going to need 10 trains a day. You think about that, that's 10 trains laden with 10 boxcars a day, or 100 boxcars for 100,000 men, or 1 boxcar per 1,000 men, and horses for all of the food, fodder, and munitions and materials. Johnston's going to need 4 at Dalton, 6 after that. So that tells you a little bit about the relative size of each army, because they're going to need about 1,000 men need a boxcar of stuff a day.
Sure.
But that's Sherman's genius. Sure. And it's been said that amateurs plan battles. You know, they study tactics, battle tactics, but professionals study strategy. And Sherman certainly was a strategist if he was not a tactician. One last thing I'll leave you with, and I'll credit Dr. Richard McMurray about Snake Creek Gap. When McPherson got into the thing on May the 8th, he found it, in the words of Richard McMurray, unguarded, undefended, unprotected, and unobserved. Johnston failed to appreciate the risk he had of Snake Creek Gap. You may blame it on Wheeler if you wish. He may blame it on Wheeler. But Johnston failed to appreciate its both strategic disadvantage to him as well as potential advantage if he had blocked it and possibly could have used other ways to trap or hit portions of Sherman's forces as it came into tail. To Hood's credit, he actually wrote in his Advance and Retreat, his post-war apology, that he believes that the entire war was lost at that rocky-faced ridge in Dalton. Wow. Meaning that if Johnston appreciated and used this line of defense and blocked the 2 or 3 spots with a few men, then used the other men to march around one end or the other and try to hit Sherman in flank and tear up portions of his army. That would have required, someone with the offensive capacity of a Jackson or a Lee, as the Lee-Jackson school, as Hood would call it. But that apparently was not in Johnston's playbook, and so I'll leave it at that. But that's in essence Resaca. I haven't talked about some of the specifics of Resaca. A lot of people want to know what the casualties were there, and we have only estimates, and that's very frustrating to me because I want to be able to put numbers, actually get numbers nailed down, and I'm working on that. And hopefully one day maybe I'll have something, but because it's out there, we have a lot of muster roll records, we have a lot of biographies and records that are available to us, and we just need to dig for it and put it together. Resaca probably had about 3,000 Confederate losses in the 2 or 3 days of fighting between the 13th and 15th of May. That's not including the 9 May stuff. And Resaca had about 5,000 perhaps federal casualties during that same 3-day span. More if you add ones that were casualties between May 9 and May 11. And I'll show, before I leave, I want to give you some reading. If you want to read further on Resaca, this is a Blue and Gray magazine article that was done by Steve Davis, Dr. Steve Davis. It's an excellent read, complete with maps and a driving guide. There's a beautiful new park that opened about 5 years ago at the Battle of Resaca. The Gordon County and Friends of Resaca groups run that. It's a state park, but it's well, a county maintained and run park right off the interstate exit at Resaca. There is a book by Dr. Phil Sechrist, who's just deceased now, I believe, and but this one is a Mercer University Press, Battle of Resaca. It's available at the Kennesaw Mountain bookstore. There is a couple of other reads, War Like the Thunderbolt by a Coca-Cola attorney, Russ Bonds. Russell Bonds also wrote the book Chasing the Great Locomotive Chase. This is a good read. And then kind of the treatise on the Western campaign, the Georgia campaign is called Decision in the West by Albert Castell. And it's a great, and I'm overlooking the work of, yeah, it's a classic, 1992, but it's still holds true, its theories, and it's very well done. And there's a chapter length on Resaca. Bill Scaife, Mr. Scaife, or Scaife is deceased now, but he did a wonderful, he got us on the map in Georgia in the late 80s and early 90s, but his works, cartography, he was an engineer and used that skill and his passion for Civil War. So he has a great work. And then there's one from a federal, those are all neutral perspectives. This is the federal perspective called They All Wore a Star by Robert Miller, that's also available. All of these that I've shown you, I think, are available at the Kennesaw Mountain Bookstore. This one is about the 20th Corps, the Star Division. Each of the Corps in the Federal Army had a different star: red for 1st Division, white for 2nd Division, blue for 3rd Division. So red, white, and blue. But they all wore a star. Are the guys that captured the Vandenkorp battery at 4-gun Confederate battery at Resaca. And so anyway, that's a little bit about Resaca and some of the reading materials available. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, no, thank you so much, Bob. That was awesome. We really appreciate all your help with this. Bob and I have been having a lot of conversations kind of behind the scenes, and he's been providing us with a lot of materials and research for later. And of course, Bob himself has some books out that is also available in our bookstore. We don't want to jump the gun too much because we're hoping to tag in with Bob a little bit later down the Atlanta campaign for a few of the other battles that he's written on, notably Teaser, Peachtree Creek. Hopefully we can get together again for that. But I want to say thank you again for taking your time. Bob and I are, we've been running crazy. We're both sitting in our offices right now, and we said, let's go ahead and do this. Let's knock it out. And I really appreciate your time. It was concise, really engaging, and hopefully we'll see you a little bit later on down the Atlanta campaign, sir. So we thank you, and we'll catch up with you later.
Thank you again.